Hey there, this is Katie from Katie and the Squid. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to properly make and measure a crochet gauge swatch. If you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe and all that fun stuff. So I'm going to go through the 3 most common mistakes that I see people make when they make their gauge swatch. Hopefully you have some sort of idea of what gauge is or what a crochet gauge swatch is. So gauge is basically a measurement of a number of stitches and a number of rows in a set measurement. So you need to make sure that you match your tension or your number of stitches in a measurement to the pattern that you're following so that your finished piece comes out the correct size. So this is really important in certain projects like garments or something that you want to make sure that fits, or something that needs to be a certain size. I've had people contact me about patterns and say it's not coming out the right size, what am I doing wrong? And usually my response would be, did you make a gauge swatch? Usually the answer is no, so they go and they make their gauge swatch and it works out fine. And if they have made their gauge swatch, then there's probably some things that they haven't quite done right, which is what I'm going to go through in this video. Mistake number 1 I see with people making their gauge swatches is they're not making them large enough. So there's a few reasons that you want to make sure that it is large enough. Reason number 1 is the larger your gauge swatch, the more accurate it's going to be. Reason number 2 is if you are including these edge stitches in your measurement, it's not going to be as accurate. So basically, these edge stitches are shorter than the stitches in the middle, and then the stitches on the top and the bottom, or the edge stitches, they're skinnier than the ones in the middle, whereas the stitches on the top and the bottom are going to be shorter than the ones in the middle. And the best way that I can describe this so that it makes sense is that if you look at the stitches in the middle, so this guy, he's got his hands and his legs out holding on to the stitches all around it, so it's all stretched out and happy. Whereas a stitch on the edge is only holding on to a stitch on this side and the top and the bottom. So it might be okay lengthwise, but widthwise it's going to be a little bit skinny. And then same goes for the top row. They don't have a stitch or a row above so that they are not stretched out to the full length. So you want to make sure that your gauge swatch is large enough that you're not including those stitches in your measurement. So I made this gauge swatch for a design that I am working up. I'm going to pull it up here so I can show you. So I'm making a little cardigan and my gauge says 13 half double crochet by 11 rows equals 3 inches squared blocked, and I'll talk about that blocked in a little bit. So your instincts might be to make your gauge swatch 13 half double crochets by 11 rows and then measurement. But for the reasons that I just mentioned, you want to make sure that it's larger than the 13 by 11. So basic rule of thumb that I kind of go by is I want to make sure I have at least 2 stitches on each side as a buffer, and then 2 rows on the top and the bottom as a buffer for my measurement. So at the very least, my gauge swatch should be 17 half double crochet by 13 rows. So I just add 4 stitches to each measurement. So add 4 stitches and then add 4 rows, and that'll give you enough of a buffer so that you can measure without including those stitches. Now, if you can make it larger than that, if you want to go above and beyond and make it a little bit larger, then I say go for it, because that's going to make it even more accurate. Mistake number 2 I see when people make their gauge swatch, and this is a big one, is they don't block their gauge swatch. So if you think about it, when you finish your item, and say you want to you're making a sweater, and when you finish the actual sweater, you block it, or you wash it, or you wear it. And what happens is the stitches relax and they kind of settle into where they're going to be. So if you block your gauge swatch is going to be more accurate and more like your finished garment, so, or finished piece, whatever you're making. So this is another gauge swatch I have here. They're both blocked and ready to be measured. So you want to make sure that how you block your gauge swatch is going to depend on how you plan on blocking or washing your finished piece. These are both for a sweater and they are both wool, so I went ahead and I wet blocked them because when I wash my sweaters, I'll probably hand wash them and lay them flat to dry, which is basically what I did to the gauge swatches. If I was using acrylic or something that stands up a little bit more in the washing machine, I might just throw the gauge swatch into the washing machine, and I might even throw it into the dryer if I feel like that. So it really depends on how you plan on treating your finished piece. So just think about how you want to wash your finished piece, and that's how you're going to block your gauge swatch. My patterns always indicate blocked, but not all patterns will. However, I still recommend blocking your gauge swatch because chances are the designer used their gauge swatch measurement to come up with the measurements for their finished piece. So the more accurate your gauge swatch is, the closer it's going to be to these finished measurements. So always block your gauge swatch. Finally, mistake number 3 I see is people not measuring correctly. So it's really important to pay attention to what is in your pattern. The most common measurement is going to be 4 inches. That's what you see most often, but this pattern says 3 inches. So really pay attention to make sure that you're measuring what it actually says, because that's a mistake that I've made before. When you go to measure your gauge swatch, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I measure. You want to first make sure that you're measuring on a flat surface. If you're putting it on your lap, maybe you're sitting on the couch and you don't want to get up to a table and it's curved because your lap is curved, it's not going to be very accurate. So if you're like me and you don't feel like getting off of the couch, grab a book or a laptop, or sometimes I've even used my phone and I'll put it on my phone because it's flat. Just make sure you are on a flat surface. Next, you want to make sure you're using a rigid ruler. I use this one. I have a few different rigid rulers around, so something like this would work great, or even just like a school ruler. You're on a flat surface, use a rigid ruler, and that's going to give you the most accurate measurement. But if you don't have a rigid ruler handy, then you can get away with a tape measure. However, I would avoid starting at 0. I would start at 1 and make sure that so I would go to 4 for these 3 inches, just because sometimes the edge of the tape measure can get stretched out, and just double check to make sure you're on a flat surface, and that's going to help it be a little bit more accurate. So when it comes to measuring, having a basic knowledge of stitch anatomy is going to help you out. So what I like to do is I like to pay attention to landmarks on my stitches. So these are half double crochet. If you can see, hopefully, these are the back sides of the stitches, and they have like these lines that go across. I might use that as a landmark, so you can see one starts here and then like one ends here, so you can kind of see where the stitches start and end. Or you can use the whole post as a landmark. You can see where the stitch starts and ends. And then as far as rows, it's pretty easy to see where a row starts because you can see the very bottom of the stitch, and then a next row starts or ends. So the row ends where the next where the next row begins. So like the next stitch starts here, so the very bottom is the ending of this row, if that makes sense. So I just try and pay attention to the landmarks of my stitches when it comes to measuring. And then the hardest thing for me is making sure, like, is looking at it, and it's hard for me to hold my ruler down and then sit here and count. So what I like to do is I like to grab some pins, like these are blocking pins, and I'll hold my ruler on my nice flat surface, and I'll start at the very beginning of a stitch and see if I end at the end of a stitch. And then I will place my pin where the 0 of the ruler starts and at the beginning of this stitch. And then I'll take another pin and I'll go to my 3 inches and I'll put my pin there. That way I can take my ruler away, and if I even wanted to, I could pick this up and bring it closer to my face so I can see better. And then I'm just going to go ahead and count this. I haven't measured this yet. Again, I need 13 half double crochets. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's not great. I was supposed to have 13 and I have 14, but this is why we do our gauge swatch. Now, what I like to do is I will move my ruler and I will measure in another spot in the exact same way, just to make sure that my tension was consistent throughout. And I'll measure again. And then I'm just going to go ahead and measure my rows to see what we're at. So I will place my ruler here and mark this stitch. And I'll go to the bottom of that one. Okay, now we'll count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So my rows are correct, but my stitches are off. This is very common for doing your gauge swatch. You get one right and you get one wrong. Not to worry though, I'm actually glad this happened so I can explain what I plan to do. So I used this hook, which is a 4mm kind of aluminum hook. I actually have a review for these hooks on my YouTube channel. So I have 14 stitches, I need 13 stitches, so that means that my tension is just a little bit too tight, which means I actually need to go up a hook size. So I'm actually going to make 2 more gauge swatches just to see what works out better. This is a 4.5mm wood hook, so I'm wondering if the wood hook will just help me, since I had the right number of stitches, but I need to change, or I had the right number of rows, but I need to change my stitches. I'm wondering if just switching to a wood hook that's just slightly bigger will get me there. I may actually make another gauge swatch using the 4.5 in the same hook set and see which one of those works best for me. So that's just a little tip for you. Trying a different hook material might just be the fix that you need. So I hope this video was helpful and gave you lots of tips and tricks of how to make a successful gauge swatch. If you enjoyed this video, do be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.